The Testaments excels at creating a certain kind of tension, and Episode 7 delves deeper into it than arguably any other hour of television to date. On the surface, Commitment appears to be just another phase of Daisy's continuous journey undercover. But when you take away the Canadian flashback scenes and Pearl Girl trappings, you're actually witnessing an episode about females making conscious, defiant decisions about what they want. Additionally, wanting things is essentially a revolutionary act in Gilead. Let's start with the flashbacks, since despite the possibility of slowing down the present-day momentum, the show is obviously invested in them. We find Daisy sitting by herself in the cafe after the June incident, in a controlled state of fear that any reasonable person would acknowledge as entirely warranted. When you state it simply, Mayday's entire leave her waiting to test her loyalty routine comes across as somewhat ridiculous. You just told this girl that because of who she is, her parents were slain. And a loyalty test at a roadside diner is your next course of action? It may be reasonable, but it doesn't exactly give her faith in the organization she's going to entrust with her life. However, it does establish a significant aspect of Daisy's personality. She doesn't shatter. There she sits. She holds out. Additionally, she doesn't cry, recoil, or demand an apology when the contact eventually makes themselves known. She pays attention. As the story goes on, that poise will become increasingly important because the character in the present is under constant pressure. The strategy that Mayday came up with, which June is said to have created herself, is sophisticated in a quite brutal manner. You need someone disciplined enough not to break, angry enough to be inspired, and young enough to be credible as a real believer. Daisy meets all three requirements, even if her decision was motivated more by sadness than by ideology. The specifics that the episode reveals in the flashback scenes, the tattoo, the made-up personal history, the laborious act of dedication within Aunt Lydia's school, recontextualize a lot of what we've already seen. Every instance of Daisy's seeming genuineness now has a deeper significance. Once you understand how the deceit works, you watch her in a different way. Garth is another. Most people would have an existential crisis if they were handed over to someone and then found out later that they were their handler the entire time. It's performed with a wry restraint that fits the character. None of this was a choice for Daisy. She hardly had a chance to decide whether or not to take part. Nevertheless, she is taking part since the alternative is to live in safety in Colombia while the machine that killed her family continues to operate. That identical machine is now staring at her a little too intently. The interrogation scenes that follow are actually unsettling because Commander Weston and the Eyes have learned that there may be an insider involved in the school bus attack. The Testaments tends to steer clear of operatic melodrama in favor of gradual, methodical dread. The show doesn't oversell the agony of one of the Pearl Girls' eventual dragging away. Even Aunt Vidala, who isn't exactly known for having a wide variety of emotions, seemed somewhat shaken. You can infer something from that. This is the issue with Episode 7, though. Agnes supplies the episode's emotional and conceptual framework for all of Daisy's narrative space. The outcomes of the ongoing matching procedure are not what Agnes had secretly hoped for. She had lobbied for Garth to be included in the dating pool. She anticipated a certain outcome from that move. Rather, he has been partnered with Becka, and Agnes is now considering a list of senior commanders, including Weston, as possible partners. Anyone would be irritated by this situation, and Agnes isn't feeling very patient. The show has been subtly building toward her reaction to Weston during the selection process. She mentions his ex-wife, the woman who passed away during childbirth. This is not a coincidence. This isn't being naive. Even though Agnes is fully aware of the consequences of her actions, she nevertheless takes them. Paula's expression at that time is a brief masterclass in barely restrained rage. Nevertheless, Agnes keeps her cool and her outward politeness while purposefully igniting a fire beneath her own choices. This is worth pondering for a moment. Up until now, Agnes has used tiny acts of resistance, such as observation, inquiry, and the silent gathering of prohibited items from outside Gilead's boundaries. Dice and pens. tiny traces of a world she has never been permitted to experience. Critics will likely point out that the scene in which she displays these to Daisy, almost like a child showcasing a found treasure, is too sincere and vulnerable for a girl brought up in Gilead's system. However, I believe such reading is missing the point. Agnes doesn't have to be pessimistic. Her specific form of disobedience is motivated by wonder rather than rage. She still lacks the vocabulary to express her desires. All she knows is that she wants something different. At the conclusion of the episode, she pockets Garth's cigarette stub and adds it to her collection. This seemingly insignificant act ends up being one of the most important of the season. It's another item from outside the designated world, and it came from a man she wasn't meant to be attracted to. Even though June and Agnes have never really shared a scene, you can see the weight of June's influence starting to permeate Agnes's decisions. Agnes is aiming for a certain kind of rebellion that seems almost innate, the same deep-seated rejection of the world as it has been presented to her. The show seems to be implying that rebellion is more than just a skill. It can occasionally be inherited. The episode Commitment tells the story of two young women who, through entirely different paths, find their way toward the same goal. One is doing an undercover operation that might result in her death. The other is purposefully ruining her own chances of getting married while gathering cigarette stubs. Various approaches. Identical impulse. When the Testaments rely on that impulse to tell the story, they are at their best. It does this week. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives like this. See you in the next review.